All right, fantastic. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to I believe we're at number 5 in a sequence of various webinars that Harmony Hill has been so gracious to offer throughout the year to its attendees and to people that have an interest in cancer prevention, treatment, and really going on to live a cancer-free life. So it's a great privilege for me to be a part of the faculty of Harmony Hill. And for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Dr. Deanna Minich, and we'll meet you one of these days at one of the Harmony Hill retreats where I give a talk on nutrition. So if you're also interested in looking into some of the other different webinars that we've done at Harmony Hill, those are also archived, and you can contact Harmony Hill to find out where you can watch those. They're all there on our archive, and so that information is available to you at any time for all of the webinars. So tonight I'm pretty excited because we're talking about something a little bit different than we normally talk about. So this past year we've talked about things like maintaining a healthy immune system. In fact, I even gave out recipes, and we talked about how the immune system works. We talked about 5 foods to boost the immune system. We did that back in June. Then before that, in April, we talked about anti-inflammatory foods. So we focused again on very specific foods to cool in the body. And back in February, we talked about spices and looking at the different spices that we've been eating. So I guess this is really number 4 in the series. So tonight, we're not going to be focusing on specific foods like we have in the past. We're going to be focusing on how we eat. How, not what we eat, but how. And the title of this talk, which is really tips to eat with awareness and really engaging in mindful munching and meaningful meals, how to make the process of eating a much more engaging, enlightening activity than just seeing it as just another thing that we have to do every day. So, like I mentioned, we're going to have lots of information here. I think you're going to find some of the studies very fascinating, some of the science on this topic. And believe it or not, there is some great marketing research studies that tell us how we eat. And by the looks, if you are seeing my screen, what you'll see here is what I call dashboard dining, or the idea of eating on the go, eating in the car, which I'm sure many of us have done or continue to do, because we're always in a rush, right? We live in a stressed world, perhaps, and we try to eat healthy, but even the healthiest meal isn't completely healthy if we're not taking it in a very conscious, mindful way. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to really focus on the eating climate. We're going to, if you haven't heard about blue zones, I'm going to talk about those a little bit. We'll talk about stress, some of the fundamentals, and mindfulness. What does it really mean when I say mindfulness, mindful munching? What does that really mean? So I'm going to give you lots of definitions and give you tips and tools on how you can bring more of that into your daily life. So I suppose the first thing I'd like to ask you is, and I really like to just both mind with this number, because nobody really recognizes the true interface that we have with food and eating. I think that many people are becoming much more aware. There has been a publication back in 2007, and by the way, much of the material that I've taken for this webinar is coming from a fascinating book called Mindless Eating by Brian Wansink. Dr. Wansink has done a lot of research in the area of how people eat, meaning how do the social cues around us determine how much meat we eat and what kinds of foods do we eat. So whether it's the music in a restaurant, the lighting in a grocery store, the packaging of certain foods, all of those things go into the process of determining, to some degree, our food choices. But the first question I'm going to ask you is, how many interactions do you think we have with food and eating on a daily basis? I'd like to pause to reflect on that question, and I'll repeat it again. But what I'm asking is, every single day, how many times are you thinking or doing something with food? This has actually been studied, believe it or not. And what I found in this study is that most people, they make about 15 food-related decisions, just 15, but they actually make more than 200 decisions about food per day. Let me just repeat that, because that's a pretty big, staggering number, that we make more than 200 decisions about food per day. Well, that's a lot. I wonder if there's anything that we make more decisions about, right? So I often ask people, does it seem, if we think philosophically about this, that we are consumed by the act of eating perhaps more than what we actually consume? The fact of, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, our mind is on food and survival. We're trying to figure out what to eat, what time to eat, how much to eat, with whom to eat. We go to the store and we're picking out foods to eat. That's a whole escapade in and of itself, right? You walk into one aisles at the grocery store and you're bombarded with choices. So if you tally all of them up, and you might even want to do this for yourself, how many decisions do you make about food and eating per day, and see if you can track them. I bet you will get into the hundreds. Some days you might be a little bit less, and some days you might be more. But anytime you go to a restaurant, you've got to choose off that menu. Anytime you're at home in your kitchen, you're choosing from the foods that you have in your refrigerator and in your cabinets. So keep that in mind, 200 decisions about food per day. Now I give you another number that is also pretty staggering. It's been calculated that on average, and of course this is extremely variable because we're all so different, right? But if we take the average of everybody, it's been estimated that the average American eats about 2,000 pounds every year, pounds of food. And if we take 2,000 pounds of food and multiply that times an average lifetime of about 76 years, we get close to about 140,000 pounds of food in a lifetime. Now, I'm a very visual person. I understand what it means to have 200 decisions about food and to be taking in 140,000 pounds of food. So for the of you that are seeing my screen, I have a picture of 15 elephants. And the 15 elephants roughly equate to this amount of food that we are eating in a lifetime. That's a lot of stuff. I've been to South Africa. I've seen elephants. They're huge. So not only is it just a lot of stuff, it's a lot of information that we're taking into our bodies. And we know that food is medicine. We know that from Hippocrates telling us that in 500 BC. We now know in the 21st century that food does a lot more than just give us calories. It's actually programming our cells, our DNA, our genetic material with information. And it will instruct the cell how to move forward. Does it divide? Does it grow? Does it replicate? Is it nourished? Is it overwhelmed? So food is information. So throughout our lifetime, we are taking in, we're almost a tube that transmits information to the level of the cell. And just to help you understand that and see that, think of a cell, and if you're seeing my screen, you'll see a cartoon of a cell, and think of it almost like the telephone relay game you would play in kindergarten, where somebody would tell somebody something, and then it would move on to the next person. It would keep going on down the line until finally that last person would say out loud what the information was that was being transmitted. And you know, as well as I do, if you've played this game, that the information doesn't always come through 100%. There might be some distortion. We might be overeating, taking in too much of those signals, even if it is healthy food. We might be taking in anti-inflammatory signals from foods that can create dysfunction at the level of the cell. So one of my favorite quotes is from nutrition pioneer Adele Davis, who back in the 1970s, 1980s talked about how every bite of food that we take in has the ability to heal or harm us. And so to think about the fact that your next meal has the possibility to change your destiny at the cellular level is a very powerful concept. So all the different proteins inside the cell acting in that relay race fashion to get the information from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, and even further on the inside of the cell to DNA. So what are the signals that we send to our cell? And there are things inherently in food, but then there are also the signals of how we are eating. If we're eating mindlessly, if we are eating excessiveness, what are we taking in? What is the symbolism? What's the literal meaning of the different signals that we're taking in? And I would encourage you just to spend a bit of time, if you are somebody that journals or writes or likes to meditate, and focus on what am I taking in on a daily basis? How am I taking it in? And one of the things, if you've ever been in any of my other classes, what I always like to say is that how we eat is how we live, and how we live is how we eat. So if you get an insight that you are eating in a mindless way, it may be worthwhile to think about how you're living. Do you feel like you're living in more of an unaware way? You'd like to have some more mindfulness in your daily life. So the current eating climate, if we look at how people are eating, we can define it in a number of different ways. Definitely, as I've been speaking to, mindless eating and overeating. But then there are some other forms of eating. In fact, I'm sure if we were all together in a room, we could make a whole long list of all the different ways that people eat. Many people are undereating. They're not eating enough. In fact, there's even that phrase, overfed and undernourished. But when I speak of undereating, I'm eating foods, but we're not being nourished by those foods because we have the wrong signals for our body. And emotional eating, I believe we did a whole webinar just on emotional eating. It's a very powerful topic. In fact, over 75% of overeating incidences are due to emotions, are due to the fact of not really relating our emotions and looking to food for comfort. And then there's also stressed eating, which a lot of us do too, right? That kind of overlaps onto emotional eating. And when people stress, sometimes they're not eating enough. They stop eating. Other people start overeating, almost like looking for comfort from the food. So the question I ask is, well, what is the cumulative effect of these practices, of the different ways that we're eating? So some more numbers for you, because I think sometimes in order for us to wrap our arms around something that might seem more elusive or abstract, we need to ground it in some numbers. So there was a poll done by the American Dietetic Association some time ago, and they polled 1,521 people. So this is a large study. You know, when you move into the thousands, that's a pretty large sample size. So what they found from this poll of over 1,500 people is that, now here's the number to think of, that 91% of people typically watch television when eating meals at home. 91%. And as you'll see later, what Dr. Brian Wansing talks about in his book, Mindless Eating, is that oftentimes people gauge the duration of their eating by the duration of their television program. So goodness gracious, can you imagine you're watching a 2-hour, 3-hour movie? Chances are that if you do tend to eat when you're watching television, that you might be eating that whole time. So to become aware of that. 62% of people are often too busy to sit down and eat. You know who I sit with? Typically working moms or mothers in general, because they are trying to prepare food for everybody. And many times they're not taking the time for themselves to sit down and really enjoy that meal because they're really focused on everybody else. So that's 62% of people. And then 35% of people eat lunch at their desk while working. So do you think they're doing either of those two things very well? Well, probably not. I know that we'd like to all think that we can multitask, but science that has come out indicates that not everybody's brain is really wired to do that, and we are compromising on some part there. So what's also interesting, based on some research that was published, is that many times we don't have awareness of how much we are eating. This is just the sheer quantity of food. And so, on average, when you poll people after they've eaten how much that they've eaten, people at our normal weight think they've eaten 20% less than they actually did, which was really interesting, right? Because they've actually underestimated the amount of food that they have eaten. Whereas people that have obesity or that are overweight actually underestimate how much they've eaten by 30 to 50%. So they even have a greater disparity between what they've eaten and what they think that they've eaten. So again, a normal weight person thinks that they've eaten about 20% less than they did, but obese individuals think that they've undereaten or they underestimate by more or an average of about double that of what a normal weight person would think. So, and I'm going to give you lots of these different studies, and I would like you to think about these cases for yourself. If somebody were to ask you after you've eaten to replicate that meal, to draw it out, how much did you eat, quantify, to see yourself how good you would be with all of these things, right? Another study that they did was very fascinating study. So these researchers were interviewing people coming out of an Italian restaurant. This was 5 minutes after they had eaten, and what they found was that 31% of people couldn't remember how much bread they ate. It's crazy. So they didn't remember how much bread they ate, and that 12% of the bread eaters denied that they had any bread at all. Now, if you think of bread, that typically comes in the beginning of the meal, so maybe there's some time lag there. But if you think about it, that's a very short time that we are eating. And so the fact that people are having issues with remembering, even within one meal, whether they had bread is quite remarkable if you think about it. So again, to think about that for yourself and how much you're able to remember and recall at the end of a meal. Now, the other aspect, now here's another study that I think you'll find very interesting. The whole idea of seeing is believing, right? So this was another published study that showed that this is called the Super Bowl chicken wing experiment. So there were people that were invited to watch the Super Bowl, and there were chicken wings. And in one room, the chicken wings that were cleaned up as soon as people were done with them, right? So they didn't see any kind of dirty dish. And then in the other room, the chicken wings, the dirty chicken wings, the eaten chicken wings, the remnants were left there. So the tables with the bones piled high, 28% less than those whose tables had been bussed. So what's really interesting here is that if we're seeing the heuristics of a meal, so if we're actually seeing that we have eaten, it may let us know and tell our brains that we have had enough, or it may just be a visual turn-off to the point we don't want to eat anymore. So it's a very interesting study that tables with the bones piled high that weren't bussed, that people would actually eat less than. And think about it, because in many restaurants that you go into, they will typically clear your plates immediately. if other people at the table are eating. So it's just an interesting psychological idea. So the other aspect to consider is portion distortion, right? So the idea that our plates are becoming larger, that our sizes are becoming bigger, and it's not that we're getting more quality food, it's that we're getting less quality food and more of it. So I'm going to talk a bit about plate size as we go forward in the webinar, but particularly we're just served large quantities of food, and so just to have a sense of the extreme proportions of foods and how they have been changing. So another very fascinating study is not just looking at the amount of food on the plate or whether or not we feel like eating because we see remnants of foods that we have eaten, but also tabulating eating rate, which means how many bites do people take per minute. Now, it's fascinating that researchers would even look at something like bites per minute, bites of food per minute. So I've done this study. It's been published, and what they did was they looked at children and monitored how many bites per minute they took. And what they found was that children that were overweight or obese were averaging more bites per minute than children that were normal weight. There was lower normal weight or higher normal weight. Either case, they were having more bites per minute, which could suggest fast eating, quick eating, and mindless eating. Even more interesting from this study is that they looked at the eating rate that the parents of these children had and found that the parents, the children, seemed to parallel the eating rate. So the eating rate was very similar to what the children had. So they had very similar bites per minute, which is no surprise if you think about it. The fact of so much of our eating habits are ingrained from our family habits, from our societal, social habits. So if we're sitting at a table every day and having a meal and everything is fast and everybody's eating fast, we might take on the energy of that fast and we might just start eating very quickly. It's interesting to see that there was a correlation with body weight and eating rate. So the steering meal, I spoke about the dashboard dining, how people are really communing and connecting within their cars, kind of the island or the bubble of cars or offices, desks, and really in isolation. And the thing with food is that it's such a unifying factor. Meals are so used to be taken throughout centuries in a community type of setting. I think about this when I think of the standard American diet, right? Yellow, white foods, eating on the run, eating processed, and think about something like the Mediterranean diet, which is very colorful, very mindful, friends and family, for relaxation. So, in part, if the Mediterranean diet, some of its therapeutic effects aren't coming from how they're eating. So I like this quote from Michael Pollan. He says, food is about pleasure, it's about community, it's about family and spirituality, and about our relationship to the natural world, and about expressing our identity. As long as humans have been taking meals together, eating has been as much about culture as it has been about biology. Really nice quote. Talk about eating with others. How does that impact our eating? Does it? Well, it's a very interesting publication on this. Showing, and I think that, I'm going to show you some results here, but keep in mind that so much of our eating with others depends on who those others are. These are now showing that the behavioral and eating habits of other people around us can, to some extent, determine what our eating habits will be. So keep that in mind. This study, what they reported was that the majority of young adults enjoy and value eating with others, but 35% of men and 42% of women report lacking time to sit down and eat a meal. Now, these are young adults. Eating dinner with others was significantly associated with several markers of better dietary intake, including intakes of fruit, vegetables, and dark green and orange vegetables. That's real news, right? To think that this study could find when we eat with others that could improve our nutritional quality of the meal. And conversely, eating on the run was significantly associated with higher intakes of soft drinks, fast food, total saturated fat, and low intake of several healthful foods. So it seems to be something that's in alignment here, right? When we eat with others, typically we are seeing their dietary intake and also reduced when we are eating on the run and we have reduced contact with others in an eating setting, we're seeing increased intake of poor quality foods. So, and again, I would say that the one disclaimer here is that it kind of depends on who those other people are, right? Do they have good, healthy eating habits or do they not? So keep that in mind. This is just, if you're seeing my screen, I have on here a true family meal. So 5 or 6, 7 puppies with their mother. So another study that was the same study, really showing the details of that. Really interesting comments here. Let me just call out just a couple of things in addition to what I just spoke of. And the fact that the study was done in young adults is so important because they're usually the ones that aren't eating so well. So we are eating with their peers and eating with family. What they see is not just better eating, but more breakfast meals. So that's in more frequent dinner meals and higher priority for really making the meal and social eating of importance. So what they concluded from this study was that family meals during adolescence may have a lasting positive influence on dietary quality and meal patterns in young adulthood. Now, why do I mention this study? Our future depends on the younger generations. And what we have seen, in fact, this came out, I believe, in the New England Journal of Medicine some years ago, where it was predicted that the generation that was just born, this is in 2005, had been predicted to not outlive that of their parents. So the question is it because of what we're eating? Well, sure it is. Is it because of how we're eating? Of course it is. You know, these two things is very important in really these formative habits that carry on with us throughout our lifetime. And even for you, think about your own childhood. I'd like you to think about family patterns that were established. You know, we have the opportunity when we are aware and mindful habits that were formed from early on and no longer serve us, right? So there are certain things that you feel like you've taken on kind of unconsciously or unknowingly, then perhaps it's time to form some new habits and also to think about who are you eating your meals with? Do they also have good, healthy eating habits? Really important. Television. I mentioned that early on, that 91% of people, when they're polled, typically would eat while they're watching television. Is that a good thing? Well, what we see from the research is that for each 1 hour increment of television viewing per day, there were higher intakes of sugar-sweetened beverages, fast food, red processed meat, total calories, and even higher intake of trans fat, which is not a good, healthy fat. We also found lower intakes of fruit and vegetables, calcium, and fiber. So the younger the generation is that's watching television and eating, the worse the dietary practice. Well, why is that? Why does television create that? Well, you could say it could be from a couple of reasons, right? Perhaps multiple reasons. But two that come to my mind is that when we are watching television, are we engrossed in the meal? Not so much, right? Meal is kind of secondary to watching what is on television and putting our focus, our brain, on the program. Secondly, if we are watching television where we're seeing commercials or even people eating, sometimes things are so subconscious and so wired into our psychology through media that we might feel like eating certain foods. Maybe we see a commercial for a certain food, and that might stimulate us to think about eating that particular food or a food that comes close to it. For all different reasons as to why television may not be a good thing to be watching while we're eating. So this is there was another study looking at adolescents and also looking at their watching television and corresponding meals and dietary intake. And again, same type of thing. Without television, we see more fruits, vegetables, dark green and yellow vegetables, even more calcium-rich food, whole grains, less soft drinks, less fried food, even less snack food, and overall, that's really important to look at, right? This whole spectrum. And when we had TV and then no family meals, numbers are poorer in comparison to when you have family meals without television. So what am I almost talking about here? Almost talking about going back to the basics of having a meal with the family and how therapeutic that can be. So one of the reasons why we might refrain from having more family meals at this time, 2013, could be because of all stress that people are feeling. So lots of stress typically equals, now this is not for everybody, but typically you see more snacking with more stress. So this one particular study published in 2007, what they showed was that people with high cortisol reactivity, what does that mean? That means when people have high levels of stress hormone, they're reacting to stress, they typically have greater food intake. And it would be great if we chose things like spinach and kale and broccoli when we were stressed, right? Because it wouldn't be an issue. The issue is that high stress responding people are not typically choosing green leafy vegetables, right? They are choosing things that are processed, fast, comfort, connected, they taste good. And so this can be an issue for you if you are subject to a lot of stress, right? So really to get a gauge on where you are with your stress level. Now, as part of talking about stress, one of the things I want to mention is that many people on a diet is a form of stress. Yeah, believe it or not. In studies, we call this dietary restraint, meaning you're told to eat certain things and not other things. So the person has a feeling that they're restraining themselves, right? So what we see, if you're seeing my screen, you're going to see this fancy graph. No need to worry about the graph. I'm going to tell you what this means. What we see in this particular study published in 2008 was that the greater amount of dietary restraint that postmenopausal women were experiencing, the greater the markers of aging they had. Meaning we feel stressed because of restraint. We're actually creating markers of aging in the body. So definitely not a good thing if that's something you're concerned about, right? Nighttime eating. There's a new phrase called nighttime eating syndrome. Very interesting, isn't it? These are the people that kind of forget to eat throughout the day. You know, they might have a pretty light breakfast, if at all. They get to work. They have a mid-morning snack. They're eating lunch. But then these people really start to pour on the calories at night when they have time. They're in the confines of their home. And this is significant. That people that shift their caloric intake to the time when not doing a lot tend to gain more weight. Remember that that wonderful phrase from Adele Davis. Remember, eat just like a prince, like a king, and dinner like a pauper. So moderate breakfast, lunch, and skimpier dinner. And then really trying to ensure for most people, again, you need to check with your practitioner, but a nice 10 to 12 hours in between the time you go to bed until you wake up so that you're not having any food. That's, of course, different if you're a diabetic or you have other conditions. Now, another study came out that showed that when people were more relaxed, that they're more beneficial for digestion compared to just chewing your food really well. So this because when we're stressed, typically what happens is we're relaxed, obviously, and we're probably not digesting our food properly. So relaxation pays off. It really helps us to digest what we're taking in. So as I mentioned, there's really good science to suggest that who your friends are, who you're emotionally close to, will be mirrored in your own habits. It can be mirrored in bad and good behaviors, in body weight, eating style, even in happiness. They have found that the people that we're connected to, if they're happy, we have a 15% greater chance of being happy if they're within the first tier of our network of knowing them. So what do we do about all this, right? I think I've informed you as to what research says, and here we get into the tools. Here's where you pull out your piece of paper and you start to write down what are the pearls for me to take away, to think about, to talk with my practitioner about. Mindful eating, what do we mean when we say mindful eating? Well, the way it has been defined, and it's been defined in various ways, this is one particular way, and I really like this definition, is that it's the act of being aware and paying attention to the current moment. It enables a person to tune in to how he or she feels physically and emotionally at any moment, and then that information can guide his or her response to a given situation. So the more we're in touch and aware, the more we can navigate where we need to go. So many different practitioners are starting to incorporate mindful eating to help you with eating experiences, to help direct your attention to the act of eating itself. And one of the key hallmarks here for mindful eating is to really not have judgment or really to experience the eating without, typically whenever we are confronted with food, what happens? Our judgments, our opinions, our perceptions, the blame, the whole blaming game comes out, right? So observing our reactions, but knowing our emotions take hold of us. That could influence all kinds of things that are happening in our body and even digestion, right? So really the more we can become aware of all the aspects of ourselves, the better we will be in terms of our health. So principles of mindfulness, here are 5 of them. This comes from the Center for Mindful Eating. Say is mindfulness is deliberately paying attention and being judgmental. It emphasizes both what's happening inside you and what's happening on the outside in your environment. It's also being aware of what is present for you mentally, so through your thoughts, through your emotions, and in your body in every moment, kind of keeping track of mind, emotions, and body. Where are you? How do you feel? One of them may require attention. And with practice, mindfulness cultivates the possibility of freeing yourself of reactive, habitual patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. And finally, mindfulness promotes balance, choice. We have locus of control rather than feeling like we're the victim in an environment, with an acceptance of what is. So we're eating mindfully. The way that we apply those principles of mindfulness to mindful eating is to allow ourselves to become aware of the positive and nurturing opportunities that are available throughout the entire food preparation cascade, whether it's buying food at the grocery store, preparing it in the kitchen, sit down to eat, and after the meal. It also incorporates choosing to eat food that is both pleasing to you and nourishing to your body. And many times we have one without the other, right? How do we make both happen in a meal setting? Also acknowledging responses to foods, whether it's a like, a neutral, or a dislike, without judgment. And then to be aware of physical hunger and satiety cues to guide your decision to begin eating and to stop eating. There are lots of great tools on mindful eating. What I would encourage you to do is really just to go to there's a great website, the Center for Mindful Eating website. They have so many great handouts. All these things I'm repeating and showing you are all on the website, which is www.tcme.org. And it's T in Tom, C is in Kathy, M is in Mary, E is in Edward.org. So if this information speaks to you, print it off and see how you can eat more mindfully based on these principles. When we look at people eating mindfully, what we see is, and I thought that this was a fascinating study. So 140 people that were divided into three groups, some people that were in a 9-week mindfulness-based eating awareness program. And at the end of that 9 weeks, after having the mindfulness practice, they actually had less insulin resistance after meals. I think that this is fabulous, that we can actually change our blood sugar and insulin control through the aspects of mindfulness. There was another study that was published, and this was in Alternative Therapies in 2007. People that were in the study had type 2 diabetes, were instructed on mindfulness practice, a specific type called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And what they showed at the end of the 12 weeks and the 8 weeks is that people had better improvements in their weight and so in their glycemic control. So they didn't even change the foods, they changed how they were eating. Another study showed that people that were enrolled in a mindfulness-based stress reduction course had a reduction in binge eating as well as accompanying anxiety and depressive symptoms. It helps with how we eat through amount, being aware of our bodies, and also even helping with some of the factors of mood. There was also another study, and this is, again, people with eating disorders. And in this particular study, 6 college-age women with bulimia, and for 8 weeks of participating in mindfulness-based eating disorder treatment group reported a level of transformation. So really morphing from self-loathing to an inner connection with themselves and greater self-awareness, acceptance, and compassion. Now that's great, big, huge. And furthermore, they had less emotional distress and improved abilities to manage stress, so better. So wouldn't it be wonderful if weighing journey that we brought in these aspects of mindfulness? There are people and populations that are already doing this, right? This is where I mentioned the blue zones. If you haven't read this book, you might be interested in it. It's written by Dan Buettner. He's different populations of people to see what made people live really long. And he said there were 9 principles that seem to emerge. And many of them are really connected to what we're talking about living and eating mindfully. Move naturally, being mindful about movement. Hachibu means eat until you are no longer hungry, not until you are full. Emphasis on plants. Getting medicinal beverages like green tea, or if you drink wine, dark red wine. Have a sense of purpose, reducing stress, belonging to a group, putting loved ones first, so having a sense of family, and having a sense of right tribe or the social networks around you that are beneficial. Let's talk a little bit about the language of foods, because I just mentioned hara hachi bu there. Eating until we are no longer hungry is very different than what we might hear when we go to a restaurant. We might say, oh, I'm full, I'm stuffed. So hara hachi bu, we can eat until we are about 80% full, right? Until we get to the point where we can still move. We're not tired after we eat. The point of eating is to give our body energy, not to take it away. So there's a whole paradigm here of how we even think about food, right? In Dr. Wansing's book, he talks about why French women don't get fat. Very interesting here. This was a study in which they looked at 282 Parisians and Chicagoans. They filled out a questionnaire on how they decided it was time to stop eating a meal. Parisians say, what did the people from Paris say? They said, eating when I am no longer hungry. Similar to the people in Japan. The people in Chicago, and I say, but I'm from Chicago. No, I love Chicago. But they responded that they stopped when they ran out of a beverage, the plate was empty, or their television show was over. So keep this in mind, that the more we rely on external cues to tell us when to stop eating, chances are that's going to influence our body weight. We might take on more body weight because we're just not managing that. So how do we manage stress positively, right? Relaxation techniques are important. Lifestyle, evaluating our lifestyle, looking at physical activity, looking at sleep patterns, and even the different nutrients that we're taking in. If we get relaxation techniques, make sure that we are getting that deep lower belly breath. Whether if we like meditation or prayer or yoga, something to bring us back into balance. When it comes to lifestyle strategies, lots of different things there. Really setting priorities, not becoming overwhelmed by the day, but organizing it effectively so that you can do your best. Really, what I have found with people, and myself, is that perfectionism is not a redeeming quality, right? It really finds the worst in you rather than the best in you. Letting go of it and really setting a plan, moving forward, and coming into a place of acceptance. I think that sleep is one of those things that's not talked about enough. We need sleep to help restore our bodies. And when we're not sleeping enough, we actually crave more foods. It sets our eating rhythm out of balance. Continually stressed, really making sure that we check with our healthcare practitioner on what nutrients we might be deficient in. Do we need additional supplementation in order to help us with stress? Do we need to eat different foods to help us with stress? That should be evaluated as well. I'm going to give you some more tips here, one of which is if I were working with you individually, I would be coming over to your house and be looking at the foods that you eat, but not just the foods that you eat. I'd want to see, where do you eat? What are you eating on? How big are your plates? I'd want to look at, in your cabinets, I would take out your plates, I would take out your bowls. Are you looking at the size of your silverware? Because all things determine to some extent how much we're eating. Don Singh published a report that showed that 72% of our calories come from food that we eat from bowls, plates, and glasses. And there can be some tricky things. Some, you can call them, I remember growing up calling these optical illusions, right? If you're seeing my screen, you're going to see two lines. One is a horizontal line and one's a vertical line. Believe it or not, they are both the same size. Our eyes play tricks on us. So when it's like that into food and food containers, people think that when they're drinking from a short, wide glass, that they have more than if they were drinking from a tall, skinny glass. Tall, skinny, seems to note more in our minds than a short, wide glass. So end up eating or drinking about a third more. Now, if you're seeing my screen again, you're going to see two black dots surrounded by white circles. And it would be asking you the question, which black dot is bigger? Now, you found that one of them looks bigger than the other. But truly, they are both the same size. And the lesson here is that when we have a little bit of food on a smaller plate, it looks more pronounced, and it gives our brain the message that we're having a hefty portion versus having a little bit of food on a large plate, which signals to our brain that we're not getting enough. So as I mentioned, I grew up in the Midwest, and I just remember that there was so much of this clean your plate mentality, right? So when we focus on the plate, it's almost like that becomes a moving target, because we can go to a restaurant and have a large plate. We're going to feel obligated. If we have been programmed with the message of clean your plate, you just automatically move forward in that direction of cleaning your plate, whether or not you are full or no longer hungry. So keep in mind, what are your plate sizes? What I like to do is I like to eat from a bowl. It's nice because you can, if you put two hands together, this is like the same size of your stomach. Imagine a bowl that you're eating from that's about that same size. Another study was done that showed that basically the more variety we have, and let's just translate that. So let's just imagine we're going to a buffet style eating, right? The more variety, the more we might tend to eat and overeat. There was a study looking at a party situation where in one room they had 3 bowls of food, and in another room they had 12 bowls, and the people that were exposed to the 12 bowls ate almost 20% more than the people that just were exposed to the 3 bowls. And when the guests were interviewed at the party, they thought that the party with the 12 bowls had greater variety, and that's why they ate more. If we see the food, chances are we're probably going to eat it. So buying foods that we have to prepare can be a good thing in some ways. More hassle means less eating, and that's been shown in human studies and animal studies. If I shelled nuts versus unshelled, we'll eat, at least in normal weight people, the difference is very small. But for obese individuals, they eat much more if it's unshelled. Study showing that if chocolates are in an opaque, meaning you can't see through it, container versus a translucent container, that we eat more from a translucent container in which we can see through it, and we can be looking at those chocolates versus an opaque container. So, use this psychology to really change your eating. Eat yourself down also by eating with chopsticks. In fact, more normal weight people use chopsticks. It takes longer. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. It takes longer, and it just slows you down. Another fun thing to do, to mini size, as I was mentioning, your boxes, your bowls, smaller plates. Use appetizer plates rather than big dinner plates. Small pieces of silverware. And be careful, because if you have a lot of leftovers, first of all, the nutritional quality isn't all that great. But also, you might feel that you have more variety and you want to sample from more bowls and dishes, so you might end up eating more. So how do we bring the pleasure into the eating experience, right? Because I'm talking about a lot of different things that is in our social environment. If we feel more pleasure, chances are we're going to be more satisfied with a meal and be looking for less afterwards. So some of the aspects that you can focus in on is to think about the people that you're having the meal with rather than the food. Really important to pay attention to all of of your senses, have everybody participate in the meal. One of my favorites is to eat foods of all colors, all the rainbow colors. And if you go out to dinner, try to be the last person to start eating. Why? This is it's like a little trick here, but it works. Because the entire table pretty much paces or will be tracked. The duration of the meal is timed by the slowest eater, right? So if you pace yourself with lowest eater at the table, then chances are you're going to be in sync with kind of slowly eating and really taking it in more mindfully. If you go to a party, what do you do? Because this is where people struggle. They go to social events and then they feel like, oh my gosh, how do I manage this? So one thing is keep away from the snack bowls, at least more than an arm's length. Also, another thing, and I think this is great, not to eat while talking with others. If you give the conversation your full attention, then you're not trying to multitask between eating, listening, and talking. You want to arrive late or leave early to shave off some of the time that you might be susceptible to overeating. If you go to a restaurant, here are some of my personal tips. If I go to a Mexican restaurant, I tell them not to bring the chips to the table. If I go to an Italian restaurant or other type of restaurant that would serve bread, I ask them to take away the bread or just not to bring it. I like the idea of asking for water without ice so you don't feel cold and want to eat more. Split an entree or ordering 2 appetizers instead of a big entree. Looking around this is what I do. I walk into a restaurant, and if I haven't been there before, I look around at the other dishes to see about how big they are so that I can gauge if I should be buying an entree or getting 2 appetizers. A lot of different strategies here, right? If you're at home, what you might want to do is make a deliberate eating space, a dining area. And pre-plate your foods in the kitchen. Use small plates, taller glasses. Use slower music while you're eating to help you slow down. And avoid having too many foods on the table. More variety, again, can lead to more overeating. So a couple other things here. Brian Wansing talks about the mindless margin. Now, I'm mentioning this because, again, remember that overeating just a little bit really shift, and over time accrue more and more calories, and eventually, voila, oh my goodness, we've got more weight. So, and this is because we're unaware. We don't know that we're even eating more. So we can slightly overeat or slightly undereat on most days without being aware of it. But it's a scale of plus minus 100 calories. So this he calls the mindless margin, where we typically go over about 100 calories or under. If we were to add up all those little calories, like an example, if we ate 3 Jelly Belly jelly beans or 1 stick of gum per day, that gives us about 10 to 12 calories. And if we added that up throughout a year, that would give us 1 pound of weight gain. Because you think about it, you go through life, and then all of a sudden, middle age, it's like, how did I gain all that weight? Well, maybe there was just something subtle that we slipped into our day routine that just kind of, we thought of it as, no big deal. We weren't very mindful. But that consistently really can add up. Now, drinking a can of Coke will amount to 29 pounds over a 2-year period if we were just adding that into our normal routine. Eating from smaller packages is good. If you're buying, I know that many people like to go to the kind of the bulk stores and just buy big, large containers of things, but what ends up happening is we just end up eating more. And they've done experiments on this, whether it was with M&Ms, they give people half a pound bag, and they found that when these same people were given a 1 pound bag, they ate almost double the amount of M&Ms because they had more. Spaghetti experiment, when people were given a larger package of pasta, sauce, and meat, they typically prepared more, and they typically ate more. So suggestions, and we're nearing the end here, so I'm coming to the end. But there are lots of different things, and I'd be happy even if you took away 2 or 3 things. If you ate only in the kitchen, not at your desk, really deconvenience tempting foods. Make the health foods very convenient. Either you go shopping, use a list, and stick to the perimeter of the store. Try not to get stuck in the labyrinth of all of those aisles. Another trick, wrapping goodies in aluminum foil so you can't see them. We know studies, the more we see things, the more we're going to want them. Keep things away, not on the countertop, so that you're seeing them and that your mind gets programmed with them. Things, look at if there's an emotion there. Chew gum, if good healthy gum. There are a variety of different ones out there. That might help if you're feeling the need to just chew something, right? Eating at the table or on a plate, keep out of sight. Never eat directly from a package. So, one trick. This is a great trick from Dr. Barbara Rolls, and she has some great strategies that our eyes are tricked by volume. So if we made a quarter-pound hamburger look the same as a half-pound hamburger by adding a whole bunch of stuff on that hamburger, and I'm not advocating eating hamburgers, but I'm showing you the trick here. Let's say we added lettuce, we added tomato and onion. Actually trick us into, the sheer volume of it, even though it's not so many more calories, because vegetables don't have that many calories. A hungry person that is eating it will say that they are full compared to a quarter-pound burger. It takes up to 20 minutes for our body and our brain to signal that we're full. So we're eating with 3 other people. We eat about twice as long. So from that perspective, maybe good to be eating with others. I'm going to close here. I'm going to leave you with this quote. I think it's very inspirational. This is from Linda Wise, who says, "You tend to notice the first bite of anything." And what she's talking about, meaningful meals. You tend to notice the first bite of anything. Then the mind often becomes preoccupied with non-food related thoughts and conversation. And the next food-related observation is it's gone. Mindful eating is like a muscle that gets stronger with usage, and fortunately, it can't be learned. So I'd like to thank you for your time this evening. Lots of tips here. Hopefully you wrote some of them down. Again, I can just take 3 takeaways, remembering that mindful eating is like a muscle. The more we use it, the more it becomes habitual. It's very odd to think that something mindful can become habitual, but we create these strategies and tools and embed them into our lives so they can be more self-aware. So again, thank you so much for being part of the webinar this evening. I look forward to having you at our next webinar, which I believe is in October. Thanks so much.